Mini WarPainter!
Hi there, Kris here with another episode of Ask the Mini WarPainter. So let's get right to the questions. Instinctual writes, "Great video, Kris. Keep them coming." Okay, I will. Danish Kid 74 writes, "Kris, how do I make some really cool possessed Chaos Marines?" Well, I don't know how your green stuff ability is, but you could start with some green stuff. Find conversion bits from your bits box and start throwing in all sorts of crazy stuff. Using Tyron bits could also be really fun because they have a lot of those organic surfaces, and even look at other ranges or other model ranges. Fantasy has tons of stuff, monsters, Really the possibilities are endless as far as what makes them cool. I don't know. I'm not really with it anymore, so I don't know. Cage, son of Bator, any suggestions on the best way to paint the checkerboard pattern on orcs? We have orc tutorials going up, and I'm sure in one of those videos there'll be a nice little detailed explanation on how to do checkerboard patterning. Ben Carter 94 writes, "I want to do some object source lighting on my plasma guns. I want them to have a glue go, but I'm unsure on how to do this. Any advice could you give me?" Don't use glue to make that glow. Scott C 1995 writes, "Great to know my Eldar aren't the only one that are half painted. I think I only have a Farseer, 3 Guardians, and a majority of the Wave Serpent done. I want to base my Eldar with a lava look, and using sand and paint, I've gotten a kind of cartoony look for my Farseer. Any help would be appreciated." Well, I'm not too sure what the problem is as far as using sand on your bases, unless maybe when you're gluing the sand on and you make little breaks for the ground and then where it's cracking. And that'd be about the easiest way. And that way you can paint the white for the lava, and then you go in with little edges of yellow with a little bit of orange and a little bit of red. You dry brush the top surfaces of where the ground should be. That's all going to be black and gray, looks like ash. And then you hit it with a little bit of water stuff to make it smooth or glistening. Dragoon 1383 3 writes, "Kris, I'm making a Dark Eldar army. What advice do you have on painting diamonds, as I want to include Harlequins as a link to some allied Eldar?" Well, diamonds, kind of like the checker pattern, it's not terribly difficult. Basically, you're starting off with diagonal lines down your surface, and then you go in the opposite direction with diagonal lines. Very carefully, using your finest tip brush you've got, and then start picking every odd square and start filling them in. That'd be about the easiest way to do it. Unless you made a stencil and you airbrushed it, but then we're talking large surfaces, so nah. Rated Lex writes, "My biggest thing I can't do is paint horns, such as on helmets. Any advice?" On some of the Chaos Warriors, like for Chaos Space Marines, they do have very smooth horns, and there's not very much texture there. And so often what I do for those kinds of horns, claws, Tyranids, often they'll have really smooth kind of clawed pattern or whatever on the surfaces, when it's just not enough of those little ridges in there to make it, really claw-like. Often what I'll do is I'll take my base coating brush, which is often a fairly larger brush, and especially for those detail areas, and I'll run my brush across my palette. And so imagine these are the bristles, and I run it across the palette, and then I flip the brush over and I run it across the palette, so I make a nice little kind of flat edge, and it's really more like a little blade almost. And so the bristles, just like my fingers, will form little gaps, and then in one stroke you can create that illusion of those ridges in the horns. That's one way of doing it, and it's really simple, and it's often you can just do it in a single stroke. That's one of the easiest ways to do it, other than going in with a fine brush and painting in all those little ridges on the horns. Jay Bentley writes, "Doing some Leviathan Tyranids, but I struggle with painting white. Any tips?" Best tip I can offer is hopefully you're priming it in white spray paint. That's about the easiest way. And then once you spray them white, you can hit them with an ink wash. Often for that Leviathan color scheme, they often has more of a darker purple. And so I would often recommend that. Taking a little bit of purple and a little bit of black wash, mix them together on your palette, and then do a wash in those areas. Leave it kind of heavy in those little crevice areas of the model. It should turn out well. And in fact, you probably wouldn't even have to touch it much. If you ended up covering and tinting the whole model kind of with a purple, then you can go in and dry brush right over with just the bare white paint, and you should be rocking and rolling by that point. Slapdash Mini writes, "Hey Kris, so not that I condone it, but there are a lot of people out there who lick their brushes to keep the tip on them. On this note, what do you think is the worst tasting paint?" Enamel paint is the worst. It's hard to get out of your teeth. You gotta use like turpentine. And Edvard writes, another riddle. A man takes a barrel that weighs 20 kilograms and puts something in it. It now weighs less than 20 kilograms. How is this possible? I don't know. 40K Tyron writes, "Hello, Kris. What do you think of the new rules for 40K? Will you collect a second army? And if you do, will you video it? Oh yeah, thanks for the advice about motivating myself to paint. Good luck." I do like the new rules, especially about all the flyers. As anybody who keeps up with any of the updates from my vlog and such, I do have a lot of flyers in my collection, and I would love to get more. The new rules, I do like it. I think it favors very shooty kinds of armies more so than other kinds. A lot of people probably disagree with that, but it's just my opinion from what I've seen, how it plays. Now, my way I play my army, it tends to be very shooty, and so close combat, people coming in, shoot them up. Would I collect a second army? Possible. I was thinking about Crimson Fest. Emperor's Wrath writes, "Kris, I am a woodworker by trade, and in my spare time have decided to begin wargaming. I thus have two questions. How do you keep paint workable if you live in a very dry environment? Second, what is a Kris recommended method of painting armor to give it a look of pearl?" Well, as I don't live in a very dry environment, I'm not sure how to keep your paint wet other than advising a wet palette. That's about the best way. There are many wet palettes available for consumers. I put out a video a while back about how to make a wet palette of your own for like less than $4. As far as getting that look of pearl, well, it's kind of a challenge because pearl is often a white background, and then the light plays with it and gives you blues and reds, and you know, it's almost like a rainbow effect in the surface. And so that's quite a challenge when painting onto a flat surface in a model that often doesn't allow for light to play on. Often our painting techniques don't incorporate that. And so really you could probably find like a pearl kind of paint, nail polish, something along those lines, but those tend to be enamels, and so you kind of have to do that in one try to get that complete look of pearl. If you want to really emulate pearl, that's about the best way. Look for a pearl paint. Deviouz Towel writes, "Hey Kris, I'm a towel player and I need help with painting. Can you please make a video of painting towel skimmer tank camouflage effect, army style? I would really appreciate it." Yeah, I could make a video about that. Danger Dude writes, "Hey dude, do you think you could take less from awesome paint job in a fight?" Mo Kill writes, "Please advise me on how to paint black armor. I never seem to get it right. It always comes out too gray or too dark. So how do you do it?" Well, if it's coming out too gray, your highlight, you're probably like, if you say for example, let's say it's a shoulder pad, and so your highlights might be coming down, say halfway down the model. In that black of the black armor, keep your highlights, your midtones, closer to the edges of the models, allowing more black to show through on that surface. And that way the model will feel more black, of course. And so you can actually edge highlight up to almost a white. And as long as you just kept your gradients very small and very tight on those edges, really for black armor, you can go in with a dark gray and just go two levels up. Black armor is done. Black armor, the blacker you leave it and the less highlighting you do, often the more effective it looks. Nudo Ninja writes, "I would take many slugger rounds for you for pronouncing my name right. You are P-I-M-P. Now I guess I'll have to get one of them big hats." Necron Master 98 writes, "Hey Kris, I just started a Necron army and was wondering how often should I dry brush? After every layer or once after a layer? When you're dry brushing, often that is the layering. When you're layer painting, you're taking the brush with a load of paint and you're applying a layer of highlight. When you're dry brushing, you're taking a color and you're providing a gradient, and so that is the layer that you're applying onto the surface." Bowling Ball 98 writes, "Hi Kris, will you doing a Blood Raven tutorial and vehicle tutorials as well? Thank you if you answer this." I can do a Blood Raven tutorial and a tank tutorial. Toby of Blood writes, "Hey Kris, I love your painting style, and it could be awesome if you made your YouTube channel. Okay, a question. How do you motivate yourself to start painting a mini? I always like, or I am tired, or I'm too tired, and so on. And the problem is, I love painting minis more than I love to play. So can you help me?" Toby. Well, Toby, often it just, set aside some time, sit down at your desk, Often I find assembling a model or two, and you start getting into it, and then you feel like painting a model. Often I feel like painting after playing a game. It often motivates me because somebody else will have their nicely painted models there, and I'll be like, oh my, I gotta get my work done. Spartan Myth writes, "Hey Kris, how do you do alternative light source effect? I plan to do that on my decimator engine for the eyes, but I have never done that effect before, and there are no guides I have found. Thanks." Well, often for that little effect for the eyes and such like that, often you want to go, so say for example it's a red, you go in with say like a deep color like Mephiston red, and then you thin that paint down very thin, and you apply a slight little layer under the eye, and then you might want to go in with a thin layer of a lighter red, and then possibly tiny little dot of the little orange. And often that is about the simplest way to do it, other than doing many layers. I'd like to thank everybody who wrote in for this episode, and please keep the questions and comments coming, shouts of encouragement, and riddles. Riddle me this. And so that's it for this episode. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for watching. Happy War